So a couple more simple material assignments and tweaks, and I think we're finished. So whenever you're finished, or even as you're working, you want to take a look at this thing rendered, but you don't want to you want to be sure that you render it in a relatively what we would call neutral light setup. You don't want to render it over white, you don't want to render it over black, you want to render it over mid-gray with some kind of appropriate lighting so that you're looking at the true colors of it, so that you can tell if it was going to work with other items or not. And it just gives you a good sense. It's kind of satisfying anyway, a good sense of what what you've built looks like. So a really easy way to do that is to create a plane here. So I'm going to create this plane. It doesn't really matter what the length and width are, because of course I can set them to be whatever I want at any time in the parameters here, but I'm also going to center it a little bit just because. And then you go to the modify panel and you see we could set this to be 5,000 if we wanted to, the plane to shoot out to, almost infinity. But one of the aspects of plane is that there's this attribute called scale. So you can go ahead and set that scale, and you can make the scale 10 times whatever it is. Now it's only a render multiplier, so it doesn't change anything in the viewport here. It just renders this 10, 20 times as big. So you can go ahead and just use that, and then you have a sort of a smaller plane to manage. You don't have this huge thing going off into 10,000 units into the scene here. So we have our plane, and we need to assign. I'll go over here, drop down to just some mid-gray material. Make sure that this material is mid-gray. They don't quite start off at mid-gray. It kind of looks mid-gray, but it's not really. Mid-gray is 128. So that's mid-gray. Hit OK, and you can call this ground. And then assign it to that plane. Now next step is you go to the rendering menu. And in the rendering menu there's this thing called environment. You go into environment and you'll see background color. It's black by default. You actually want to look at these things over mid-gray as well. So you can change value up here to 128. Hit OK. And then if you render this, well, okay, so it's not, the environment color is not really agreeing with this ground color. This ground color is getting shaded by this default light source, so it's not really, this is true mid-gray. This isn't quite yet, but when we add in a light, it will be. So we can add in this thing called a skylight. And this skylight is really cool because it allows you to create light that comes evenly from all around. Now just make sure that the multiplier is 1, that the color is white, okay? And you want to turn on cast shadows. Now it defaults to 20 here, but you can set it to be 5 to preview, maybe 10 to preview, and then back to 20 when you do a final render. Now this definitely is not the cheapest way of doing this. The renders take a little bit of time, to be honest, because it's shooting a lot of rays here and doing a lot of shading, but it does look nice, and it's not like I said, it's not the most efficient, but it is the easiest. So it's a good way to start. And then you can also create a free direct. So I'm going to create that directional light in here. I can move it up and then rotate it around so that it's pointing some roughly 45-degree angle to my thing there. And you can go in there, and if your multiplier is 1 or whatever, you're probably going to want to take this down to 0.6 or 0.5 or something in that neighborhood, because you have that skylight. Now it can be a combination between the skylight and this direct light. I kind of find that I like the skylight being at 1 and the directional light being at 0.5. Anyway, make the color white, and if you have in the directional parameters, if your cone is small here, what you can do is, it depends on whatever object you've made, but may or may not be, but you just want to ensure that that cone is big enough to encompass your object. And you can even pull the hotspot in a little bit, so you have a little bit of fall off between these two regions. Whatever. You make like a kind of a nicer fall off here. And then you can hit render. Make sure that this thing is casting shadows. Turn them on. You can use shadow maps or ray trace shadows, whichever one you like. For now, ray trace is a little bit simpler. It's not something that we've gotten into so much, the differences. And then what I'll do is go over to my my skylight here, and probably have to pick by name. And if sometimes 3D Studio is a little bit fussy. It always kind of wants to pick that ground plane. Now, one thing that you can do, one way that you can get around that is you can go through here and you can select what it is you're picking. So you pick just lights, and then that makes it easier. You can also go into the select from scene and turn everything off, and then turn lights back on and pick that way. So either way, right now I'm going to make sure that my raise per sample is up to 20. And that gives a nice neutral render of this thing. And it is, what's good about the combination of lights is you get a nice shadow, but you also get these nice soft diffuse shadows. And so that really helps to solidify the thing. Well, that shadow modeling really gives a sense of the form of it. And at the same time, it's under neutral lighting here. So it's a good way for you to visualize, what the true colors of your object are, while at the same time casting some nice shadows.